So finally, we're moving closer to actually doing the user test. And again, the user test is the thing you need for the summative usability evaluation, essentially the final user test on your final product, which you're going to release, or at least something which is very, very identical to it, which doesn't have major differences, which would influence the usability. And for this, we have this template called Usability Evaluation Protocol. I'll be talking a bit later about how to actually do this user test. For now, we'll just be preparing it and creating some documentation, because that's what we do as regulatory people, right? Create documentation. So it has essentially 3 sections. In the first section, you describe your user group and your environment. For example, for the Magic COVID photo application, our user group is physicians, and the environment would probably be like everywhere or like in a hospital. So nothing really specific. It'll be like indoors. Well, it could be outdoors. Maybe people are like in a rush, but I mean, there's not really that much you need to like focus on. Like again, talking about the radiology software example from earlier, there the environment could be different, right? Because like in these radiology reading rooms, usually they're like dark. They're very special computer screens with which they are using. So it's not like your everyday computer or smartphone setting. But for this one, probably it is. Then finally, describe how you prepare your participants. So will there be some sort of training? So remember, in hospitals, typically to learn how to use the crappy software, you usually get a crappy training before, and then you have to sign off. Essentially, you don't learn very much, but there has been a training, right? And if you can ensure, and if your product is planned this way, that all your users will be trained prior to use, then of course in your usability evaluation, in your user test, then you may need to make sure that these people receive the same training. And the opposite is true too, right? So if nobody will ever be trained using your software in real life, then probably the same should be true for your user test, so people won't be trained. And you can actually test certain aspects of this. So if there's like a user manual, but like always, no one reads the user manual, you could do a user test where some people read it and some people don't. Some people maybe just like you just put it there and leave it with them, and they get to choose whether they read it, and you kind of check how much have they read and how much has it helped them. So, and another minor aspect, something like maybe it's available in the application, and you can check, do people actually find it, and do they read it, and does it help them? So that sort of stuff. Define this preparation and describe it, and note it down in your usability evaluation protocol. Now, the main part is actually this list of tasks, right? And we only need to understand this because the protocols below, they are copy-paste versions of this, which you will understand shortly. I've copied this, talking about copy-pasting, I've copied this to a spreadsheet. So I took this table and these columns, and I just essentially moved this to a spreadsheet. So you have the same columns here from the draft, from the template protocol here. Wait, here, right, okay. And now it's pretty simple. Now we just fill it out. That's how we roll. And now you have to think, and this is very, very simple, right? You need to convert the list of hazard-related use scenarios, which we wrote in an earlier video. We need to convert these to like actionable tests, which we can actually do with real people while they're sitting like in front of us and using our software. So how can we give them proper instructions so we can actually test these? My recommendation would be to, just like copy paste this and see what happens. So let's just copy paste it, because that's what we do. Okay, so whoops, this will have to move here. This will move here. And we don't have this stuff. Okay, it will be clear shortly. So, oh no. Okay, so what happened here, right? So we've moved the hazard-related use scenarios here. The description is on the left. We're not mentioning the actual user group anymore, like physician, because we've described them already earlier in the protocol, right? So you would describe the user somewhere here. You could create a separate sheet. I'm not going to do that right now. You could create a separate sheet and do the user description here. So we copied the description here of the hazard-related use scenario, copied the app state here, which is fine. We need to know that, and which state will the app be when we'll be testing this with real users. And now we have to fill out the instructions, the acceptance criteria, and not yet the observations and not yet the hazards encountered. So think about it this way. How would you instruct a user to test for usability? And I've seen things go wrong in essentially one direction here, which is writing it down like a software system test. And this is wrong because that's what a software system test is for, a manual test. So don't write like, so what do we want to do, right? We want to see if users understand the positive result. So let me show you how it's done wrongly first. It's like first step is like launch app by clicking on app icon. Second step would be like hit green button to take picture. 3, take picture of user, patient. 4, read result. 5 is like positive test result, or like COVID positive test result is displayed. Okay, and then acceptance criteria would be like, I don't know, like COVID positive test result is displayed. Okay, so this is wrong, right? So this is because this is way too specific. This is testing your software and not testing usability. You're testing, well, what are you testing? You're testing whether whether pushing buttons will lead to displaying the right text. And for me, this doesn't sound like a usability test. This sounds like a software test. And I mean, the intention here is fine. It's like testing your software, but this is the wrong place to do it. It should be done in your software system test plan, protocol, and report, and specifically the protocol. So let's start over. This is about testing usability, right? You want to test whether a user understands the COVID positive result. So how would we do that? Maybe we would have to ask them, right? We would have to ask them, okay, as a result being displayed, and what does this result mean? Like, describe it to me. So let's just skip ahead with the technical stuff. It's like view, like take picture and view COVID test result. Okay, so that's and because these are instructions, I would actually phrase them quite literally, like how you're talking to someone. Like, so take a picture, not even like take a picture, right? So like do a COVID assessment of a patient, or like let's say we provide them a patient in front of them for this usability test of the patient in front of you, and you could even leave it at that, right? Like you could even you wouldn't have to tell them like, hey, view the test result, because maybe you also want to see whether they understand that a result will be displayed next. That's the next step. Okay, so we could do this minimalistically like this, like do a COVID assessment of the patient in front of you. Let's make it just a bit more specific. Okay, right? So view the test result. So the test result is being displayed. So the person has taken a picture of the person's face, and then it says like, hey, person is COVID positive or negative. Okay, so it says like, view the test result. What does it mean? And then you could maybe ask like, does this person have COVID? And maybe like 3, like which next medical steps would you likely initiate? Okay. So we want to see, in the first step, the person does the COVID assessment, and well, in this sense, you're actually testing multiple usability things. You're like testing, okay, can they properly like navigate there in the app? Can they hit the right button? Can they take a picture properly? So we're just hopefully assuming that that won't be a problem here because we're actually testing other stuff. But so the acceptance criteria for 1 would be like user navigates to correct section and takes a picture for a test, for a COVID assessment. But again, this is not the focus of this test, so yeah, it's kind of like a byproduct. But now 2 is relevant. So 2 would be like, okay, to test result is understood correctly. So that's either COVID positive or negative. And 3 would be like correct test result leads to well, leads to correct medical understanding and intervention. Okay, so in the second step, we're checking does, like, if it says COVID positive or negative, does the physician, the user, like understand it as such? Like if it shows like this person is COVID positive, you would ask the physician like, okay, so what does it mean? Like what does the test result mean? And the physician would need to answer, yeah, this person is COVID positive. Okay. And then you would be asking like, yeah, does the person have COVID? And then the physician would be yes. And you would be, okay, great. So probably people understand the output from this application. And then the next step, in the third step, you would be like, okay, so what's the next medical step? And again, we're trying not to test like the competency of the physician, but maybe we're trying to test again whether they've understood it really correctly. Like then the physician would be like, yeah, the person is COVID positive, so we would be, I don't know, sending them to the hospital or send them somewhere for further testing, like for like real testing, not testing them with the app. So that's what you're trying to do. Okay, so I hope that this is kind of clear in this example, that you're really testing, do people understand the software and do they use it like the way it's intended to be used? You're not testing whether the software is actually working. That hopefully is the case. So let's do another example just to maybe understand this a bit better. Okay, so maybe we should have actually done this example earlier, right? So we can copy paste a lot from this, but that's what we do, I guess. We copy paste stuff. So the second scenario is about a physician taking bad pictures because they're clumsy with the phone, and that could be a usability problem because bad pictures lead to bad results. Now how can we test that? And actually we could just like reuse stuff, right? So like we could literally just reuse step one, and maybe this should be tested as a first scenario, and then the second scenario you could just like skip test one and just like do it sequentially, right? Okay, whatever, let's just do it this way. So one would be like do a COVID assessment of the patient in front of you, and acceptance criteria. So we would be more fine-grained here. Acceptance criteria would be we could actually start off with the acceptance criteria we had for the first one. Copy paste this. But then we would focus more on the picture, right? Takes a picture for a COVID assessment, and then like the picture is of good quality, in focus, and the patient is mostly in the center, for example, right? So you want to test, can the user handle this picture-taking feature or process? Like, do they take correct pictures from a usability perspective? And that's what I hope what this acceptance criteria describes. And again, no software testing going on here, right? You're not testing like is the picture being saved correctly? Is it in the right file format? Are the colors right? Like that's kind of irrelevant. You've tested that before. This is testing about can like this random physician who's your test user, can they actually manage to take a picture well with the application? So that's what we're doing. Cool, so that's our preparation for the protocol. We'll be filling out the observations and hazard encounters later while we actually do the user test. And our preparatory work was actually only writing down these instructions for each of these scenarios and writing down acceptance criteria. One final note would be, of course, you could create multiple tests for like one hazard-related use scenario. So now we have like a one-to-one mapping. Each hazard-related use scenario only has one test, but maybe that's like a bit too optimistic. Maybe you would want to have multiple slightly different tests for like the same scenario. So maybe you would have like a specific test where like a COVID test result is displayed which is positive and one which is displayed which is negative. And for each of these test results you want to test, does the physician properly identify the positive result as positive and negative as negative, and so on. All right, so in the next video, we'll be actually doing the user test, and I'll have actually a nice real-world user test with our friendly other open regulatory person, Sven, and, well, only a video. And then we'll actually be filling out these columns, observations and hazards encountered. So yeah, let's get started with the actual test next.